It's easy to trust God when everything is going great, but it's an entirely different story when it feels like your life is falling apart. In this video, I'm going to share with you 3 things you can do to learn to trust God more fully. You know, the Bible is full of those verses that teach us to trust God. Trust God with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. Jeremiah 29:11, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. It's Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse that teaches us that He is with us through everything, that He has everything under control. Yet, knowing it and feeling it are 2 very different things, aren't they? My name is Tammy from the website Footprints of Inspiration and a Faithful God podcast, where I teach women how to let go of that need for perfection in their faith walk so they can show up perfectly imperfect and create a deep and meaningful relationship with God. So today I'm going to share with you 3 things you can do every day to help you learn how to trust God more completely. But before I do, we first need to understand 3 very, very crucial truths about trusting God. Number 1, trusting God isn't a feeling, it's a choice. It's a choice that we make each and every day, and on some days, we have to choose to trust God over and over and over again. We have to get persistent and consistent in our pursuit of God in order to learn to trust Him more fully. Number 2, God created our brain so beautifully. You see, we have these neural pathways in our brain, these pathways that we have actually created all through our life with the things that we do, with everything that we do in life, every single scenario. So when we're in high stress situations, what have we been doing all of our lives or most of our lives? Worrying, right? We worry, we fret, we feel that anxiousness creep up, and we feel like that's the way we have to go. And our brain takes us automatically in high stress situations. Our brain automatically takes us, down that path of least resistance. What it does then is it immediately starts to worry. It immediately starts to feel anxious. Our brains are just wired to do these things to protect us. But you see, the thing about it is our brain doesn't know that whether it's a lion coming straight at us or whether or not it's just a hard situation that we're in. Our brain can't tell the difference. It automatically jumps into action and goes with the path of least resistance. So again, that's going back to worrying. That's going back to those anxious thoughts. That's going back to those emotions and thoughts spiraling out of control when we're in those high stress situations. So we've got to understand that in order to learn to trust God more fully. Here's the beautiful truth about this. We can create new neural pathways in our brains. We can create them. What does that entail? That requires us to get persistent and consistent in our pursuit of God. That requires us that when those feelings, those thoughts, those feelings start to spiral out of control, we have to stop, stand on what we know to be true, not on our feelings. What do we know to be true? That we can trust God in every situation. What do we know to be true? That God is with us always. What do we know to be true? That God will never leave us and that He has everything under control. So to create these new neural pathways, when we feel those emotions start to spiral out of control, when we feel feel those anxious thoughts and that worry start to creep in, we have to stop, set our mind on what is true, not our feelings. And again, there are going to be days that you're going to have to do this over and over and over again. But what you're doing, again, is creating those new neural pathways, those new habits of turning to God, those new habits where it becomes a lifestyle that when those hard times come, because they will, that you're automatically turning to God. Number 3, you've got to understand that when you start growing closer to God, when you begin to recognize what's true, right? The truth versus your feelings and emotions, when that happens, Satan will turn up the heat. Okay. Let him. He's no match for our God. He will turn up the heat. So when you feel like, right, like we've all heard those sayings, or we've all said those, when it rains, it pours, right? Everything happens all at once. Yeah, Yeah, because what we're doing is we're sitting in these emotions. We're sitting in these spirals, this worry, this anxiousness, this stress, and everything starts coming down on us. But you see, when we understand that Satan will turn up the heat when he sees us actively pursuing God, he will turn up the heat. Okay. If you've been following me for any length of time, you've heard me tell the story of Sam Wigglesworth, right? And it's something I teach my students is we have to develop the Wigglesworth attitude if we want to learn to trust God more completely. So Sam Wigglesworth was this British evangelist, and he woke up, the story goes, he woke up one night in the middle of the night, saw Satan manifesting himself in the corner of his room. When Wigglesworth saw this, he saw it was Satan. Satan was putting on this big display, trying to frighten Wigglesworth, right? Because that's what Satan does. Wigglesworth looks at him and says, "Oh, it's you." Pulls the covers up, rolls over, and goes back to sleep. You see, when you're learning to trust God, you've got to develop that Wigglesworth attitude. You already know that Satan is going to turn up the heat. You know that. That takes all the power away from him because you already know that. And so what you've got to learn to do, is recognize what's coming from him and what isn't, right? Because we know that stress, fear, worry, anxiousness, that does not come from God. That comes straight from Satan. And so when we know that, and when we learn to recognize this, and by the way, this takes practice. This isn't a one and done thing. This is something you have to keep working at, keep training at, keep building those new neural pathways, those new spiritual habits of immediately going to God and standing on his truth rather than all these feelings, this worry, this anxiousness, this stress. So when Satan turns up the heat, not if, but when he does, I want you to develop that Wigglesworth attitude and say, "Oh, it's you," and move on. Immediately stand on what you know to be true. Now, one of the ways you can do this, just to help you put this into practice, practically one of the things you'll learn about me is I don't just teach you these things. What we want to do is learn how to apply these lessons into our life, these biblical lessons. And so what we do in those moments is while you're, take some time, carve out a little, 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and it doesn't even have to be 30 minutes, but carve out a little time for yourself. And whatever you're struggling with right now, Google Bible verses on it. Then look at some of those Bible verses, see which one resonates with you, write it on an index card and tuck it in your pocket. Because when Satan turns up the heat, you can pull up that Bible verse, right? You can recognize it. You can stop him in his tracks, and you can pull out that Bible verse and stand on the truth of God. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to share with you 3 things you can do every single day to help you, trust God more completely. But before we do that, we first need to understand why trusting God is so incredibly important in our life. Number 1, it is the foundation. It is the anchor. It is what keeps us stable, is building that trust in God. That is foundational for our Christian faith. This doesn't mean that we're walking it out perfectly. This doesn't mean that we never, ever have doubts. In a video that I did not long ago, I actually did a complete series on what faith in God really means. I'll drop the link for that below for you, I'll drop the link below in the show notes for you. But we've got to understand that this isn't, our faith in God, trusting God isn't about perfection. It's not about never having doubts. You see, faith is not the opposite of doubt. Faith is holding up that shield of faith, right? That the armor of God, holding up that shield of faith, standing below it and positioning ourselves under the defenses of God. Trusting God, again, isn't the opposite of doubt. It's taking that doubt to the Lord and saying, "Lord, I believe, but help me to believe more." So trusting God is the foundation of our Christian faith, and it's not something we will achieve 100%. I want to be very clear about that, right? I always share with you what a faith walk really looks like, not what those super Christians, by the way, those quote unquote super Christians would probably cringe if we knew that we were calling them super Christians, because they struggle with the same things you and I do, right? And so this isn't about achieving, finally getting to the finish line and achieving like complete and full trust in God. Yes, that's what we're hoping to do. We go to God and we ask him to help us trust him more. But it's never going to be complete. It's never going to be, you're never going to go through those times where you're fully trusting God and never having those doubts again. That never feeling that worry, that fear. Why? Because Satan he plays dirty. He plays dirty and he is constantly attacking us. So we just have to get persistent and consistent, like I mentioned earlier, in our pursuit of God, so that we can trust him more fully, so that we can go to him. We learn to go to him and say, Lord, I'm scared out of my mind. Lord, help me to trust you in this, because right now I don't see a way out. Lord, I know you are the God of impossibility. So help me trust you more. So like I said, it's important because it is the foundation of our Christian life. Number 2, it helps us see above our circumstances. When we learn to pursue God, when we learn that in those moments of spiraling thoughts, of that worry and that fear, when we learn to trust God, to go to God, to choose to trust him more fully, right? To make that choice, even if we have to do it 25 times in a day. When we're choosing to do that, it helps us see above our circumstances. I often say, it's like I picture it. I grew up in the cornfields, in the Midwest. Having a hard time saying that. I grew up in the Midwest, and in there we had cornfields, right? Cornfields. I went out and detasseled for a summer. And anyway, so in those cornfields, I always think of it like this: when we're in the midst of our trials and challenges, when it feels like everything around us is so out of control, like it's falling apart. It's like we're in the middle of that cornfield, and the corn is super high. It's towards the end of the season. It's super high. We can't see anything but stalks and more corn around us. And that's what it gets to be like in our hard times, in those trials and challenges. We get so consumed with what's going on and how we're going to get out, with the worry and the fear, that we can't see above our circumstances. But when we choose to trust God, when we learn to rely on him for help in trusting him, when we learn to say, you know what, I'm going to choose to trust him today, even if I have to do it over and over and over again, that helps us see above our circumstances. We begin to see God, right? It's like that parting, with all those corn stalks in the field. And all of a sudden you start to see that big, bright blue sky. That's when we're learning to rely on God and trust in him, we can learn to see above our circumstances and not be crushed by them. One of my favorite stories about this when it comes to seeing above our circumstances is Peter, when he's in the boat with Jesus, and Jesus, he wakes up, he sees Jesus walking on water, and Peter is saying, hey, Jesus, let me come and walk on water with you. And in Matthew chapter 14, verses 29 through 31, we see this interaction between them, and we see what happens. Yes, come, Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind, in the waves, he was terrified and began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? You see, Peter took his eyes off Jesus and put his eyes back on his circumstances, the wind, the waves, the fact that he was doing this miraculous thing, walking on water. And it's the same thing when it comes to our circumstances. We can remember Peter and keep our eyes focused on God and not our circumstances. And number 3, trusting God brings us more peace. And in fact, in Isaiah 26, verse 3, it teaches us, you will keep in perfect peace all who trust in you, all whose thoughts are fixed on you. When we keep our thoughts fixed on God, even in the midst of our trials and challenges, even when it feels like everything is falling apart, when we do those things, that's where we experience perfect peace. That's when we learn to trust God more fully, right? The very foundation of our faith. That's when we learn to see above our circumstances. And it's where we receive that peace by keeping our eyes focused on Jesus, and by keeping our focus, not on the challenges around us, but on God. Now, listen, my friend, I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying this doesn't take work. Nowhere in the Bible does it say following God will be easy. It doesn't. We live in a world where we are under attack all the time. Satan is constantly attacking us. Nowhere in the Bible does it say that we are to be, or that life is going to be easy when we follow him. But as we learn to become a partner, right? When we accept Jesus as our Lord and Savior, we enter into a partnership with him. And that means there are actions that we must take. So we have to actively pursue. We must choose to trust God no matter what's going on around us. All right, my friend, I'm about to share with you the 3 things you can do every day to learn to trust God more completely. But before I do, I want to invite you to hop on over to footprintsofinspiration.com/grow closer to grab my free 7 no fluff ways cheat sheet to grow closer to God. Listen, you are busy. You've got a lot on your plate. I know how difficult it can be to find that time to spend with God. And so I've created this cheat sheet for you to help you learn how to create a lifestyle of connecting with God, to help you learn how to let go of all that perfection, like what your faith walk, what connecting with God should look like, and instead just start showing up in those little moments, inviting him in throughout the day. So hop on over, grab that free cheat sheet. Again, it's footprintsofinspiration.com/grow closer, and I will put the link for it in the show notes below. So my friend, if you're going to learn to trust God more completely, what you've got to do is when things are going well, when they're going well, you've got to start creating those spiritual habits. You've got to start creating, right? Remember, we talked about those neural pathways. So you've got to start creating those spiritual habits now so that when those trials and challenges come, it'll become second nature. You'll automatically go to God, or at least it won't take you as long to go to God. You'll turn to God and say, oh, Lord, I'm scared. I'm afraid. Lord, I'm worrying, but help me, Lord. Help me keep my eyes focused on you. So we've got to prep this is what I teach my students is we've got to prep our environment. We have to be prepared so that when those times come, we are ready to go, and it becomes second nature to trust him and to rely on him. So first and foremost, the very first thing that you can do every single day is start your day in prayer. Now listen, this doesn't have to be a long prayer session. This doesn't have to be you locking yourself away in a closet. This could be you praying while you're taking a shower, while you're brushing your teeth. This could be you praying as you're on your way to work or carpool, which, by the way, one of our listeners, a dear friend of mine, she developed or does what she calls carpool prayers. When she's taking the kids to school, they actually take that time and spend that time praying with God. So think outside the box. I just love that she does that. But what I want you to do is think outside the box. Your time with God does not have to look a certain way, nor does it have to look the same every day. But start your day connecting with God in prayer and asking for his help to help you through this and to help you trust him more fully. Number 2, start by surrendering those small decisions. Not long ago, I was talking with my husband, and we've gotten to the point where, I'll ask him and he'll ask me, what do you've got going on today? How can I pray for you today? And the one time my husband, when I asked him, how can I pray for you today? He says, I don't know. There's really nothing. I'm working on a budget. And he says, I don't think God really cares about a budget, right? Now, by the way, I'm not throwing him under the bus. We've all been there. We've all had those same thoughts, right? That this is so minute. This doesn't matter. God doesn't care about this. But that's not true. And I said that to him. I said, oh, no. God most definitely cares about that. He wants you to surrender everything to him. And most importantly, he wants to do everything with you to help you through every single decision. We just wrapped up a 2-part series on knowledge and wisdom in the Bible. I will link to that in the show notes below. So make sure you go over and watch or listen to that video as well. But God cares about everything. He wants to help us through everything. So often, and we've been so conditioned by society that we've got to do it on our own, that we've got to gather our own strength, that we've got to just, come on, pull up your big girl pants and do it. No, God wants to do everything with us. He wants to help us through. He's just this loving, caring God that doesn't want to leave you by yourself for anything. And so when you start by surrendering those small things, what you feel are small things, and keep building up and build those spiritual habits of surrendering even those small details to God, when those trials and challenges come, not if, but when they come, you're going to be able to, again, it's going to become second nature for you to go to God, to rely on Him to help you through that. And number 3, you've got to be eternity focused. That's a tough one, my friend. That's not an easy thing to do. But in the midst of our trials and challenges, we've got to be eternity focused. What does that mean? We have to remember that God is working everything for our good. Always. Even if it doesn't feel very good right now, even if it feels uncertain, even if it feels hopeless, God is up there. He isn't wringing his hands up there trying to figure out how to help you get through this trial and challenge. It's already been done, and he's working everything up there for your good. And so you've got to learn to be eternity focused. So in those trials and challenges, you've got to ask God, Lord, I'm scared. Lord, I'm worrying. Lord, I'm stressed. Lord, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. I don't know what's going to happen. Lord, I'm feeling so insecure right now, but I know you have a plan for me, Lord. So I ask that you help me to see this situation through your eyes and perspective. Lord, teach me what it is you want me to learn in this moment. You see, when we start becoming eternity focused, it takes just like Peter, right? Just like Peter stepping out of the boat. It takes our focus off of our current situation and the impossibility of it and puts it back on God, knowing that God is the same God in good times and in bad, knowing that God never leaves us, knowing that God is a God who wants to help you through it. All you have to do is ask. You see, he's waiting right beside you. God doesn't force himself upon us. He doesn't force his ways upon us. He's right there waiting for you to invite him in. And so when you become eternity focused and you go to him, and yes, you let him know, Lord, these are all the things that I'm feeling. I'm so upset right now. Hey, I'm angry right now. I can't believe this happened, right? But when you learn to be eternity focused rather than circumstance focused, that's when you'll start to experience that peace that transcends all understanding, right? That peace, knowing that God is in control. Trusting God isn't easy. It isn't easy at all. And if you've spent most of your life worrying, fretting, stressing, all of that, it's going to take some time. You can learn to trust God more fully. You can learn to stop worrying and fretting. I'm not saying that you're going to stop altogether. What I'm saying is you're going to learn how, by building these spiritual habits, these 3 spiritual habits of starting your day with prayer, of surrendering the small things, and of becoming eternity focused, you can learn to trust God more fully. You can learn to trust God more easily and more quickly. In other words, it becomes second nature when these trials and challenges come. Now, I put together a blog post for you, 11 examples of trusting God in the Bible. These 11 examples are we're going to dig into their stories in this blog post, and we're going to see what we can learn about trusting God, trusting his provision, trusting his complete care, trusting his compassion, trusting his faithfulness, all the different things that we can learn from these 11 stories in the Bible. I'll put a link for it in the show notes below. You can also go to footprintsofinspiration.com/158. That's footprintsofinspiration.com/158. My friend, you can learn to trust God more fully. It requires you to get persistent and consistent in your pursuit of God. It requires you to get persistent when Satan turns up the heat, knowing, like turning to God even in the midst of it, recognizing where it's coming from, turning to God and relying on him. Satan is no match for our God. Live by that and start trusting God today. Now, I know how tough it can be getting through the hard times. So if you are watching on YouTube, I'm going to put a video, up on the screen right now with the 4-step battle plan. This is where I teach you, we dig right into the Bible, right into scripture in 2 Chronicles chapter 20. And I'm going to share with you a 4-step battle plan that King Jehoshaphat used himself, and how you too can use the same 4-step battle plan in the midst of your trials and challenges. And then, my friend, I will meet you back here next week for another episode of A Faithful God podcast.